So, what did you do last week in the world of angel investing, Harry? Where'd you put your money?
So I didn't commit. Well, I guess I verbally committed some money. I'm working on a cool, kind of what I would call an insider round right now with one of my favorite companies, startups that I've been working with since before pre-seed and advisor, investor, and seed. And they've got some stuff brewing, like a little quick insider round that's brewing. So I'm going to try and syndicate a deal and get a couple people in. And I think it'll be a really fun topic for you and I to talk about because I think I did some things well and other things not so well. But once that's all finalized and closed in a week or two, I think I'll be able to update. But it will be the first 25K check from my fund. So that's exciting.
Nice. So, I'm excited to hear more about it, the fund and the syndication. Well, I guess I can tell you a little bit about what I did.
Yeah. What'd you do?
I've been doing a bunch of SPVs.
Let me guess.
I think
Did you raise money?
I have been knocking on doors, shaking trees, doing everything I can to help some companies right now. So exciting times, and we're getting some traction, which I'm excited about. But
so
man,
these are startups that you're an advisor for, investor for, or want to invest in?
Yeah, so mostly advising and investing in companies, and just really SPVs, setting them up, but also trying to close them out. I got one that it's getting close to the end, which is great. So that'll be the first one done for the year. And
is that our SPV that we're doing together?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that I haven't really helped much with, but I am technically a co-syndicate on that deal. We can, it'll be fun to talk a lot about a lot of these once they close out. So we'll keep teasing them for now.
Yeah, for sure. So it's been good. The checks are coming in, and I'm excited for some new stuff. I think inadvertently I've been becoming an AI investor, not on purpose, but it's kind of happened. One of the deals I did at the end of last year, and then one that popped up this year. So, yeah,
that's like my nightmare, Colin. I'm like an old dog. I don't want to learn any new tricks. Crypto, I didn't want to learn anything about it. Web3, didn't want to learn anything about it. AI, I'm like, hopefully this fad will pass. So I'm going to sit this one out for now, but I will live vicariously through you. And maybe we could get a cool guest on to talk AI, and I can take that week off.
Sounds good.
So we've got a fun Twitter thread for today that I think you and I might have both commented or seen in the past week. I'll let you take it away and read it off, and we can take it from there. How does that sound?
Yeah, let's dig in. So this one is from Rockman Law. As an angel investor, is only making investments with a lead investor in place considered low conviction, or is it actually sensible? And then tagged a bunch of great folks in this. Then we'll probably read some responses. Well, one of my, we can dig into a little bit on it in a second, but one of my favorite responses was from Samir Singh, who's just a network effects expert and good guy all around. He said, in my honest opinion, low conviction, but I tend to be contrarian. As long as a company meets my criteria, I don't care what VCs think. I'd rather they love it 1 to 2 rounds later. So what do you think about that, Harry?
I don't know Samir, but if you know him and you've got good things to say about him, I'm assuming he's a pretty sharp guy. I'm assuming he's got experience. And I think the big thing to me, I saw this in a couple of the replies. It seemed like most people were on the same page. If you're a newish investor, I think that it makes sense. Like, hey, you don't know what you're doing yet. Don't screw this up. Like, let someone who's done this before kind of come in and lead the way. You're not, it doesn't, I don't think it necessarily always guarantees something, but I do think it de-risks some of that, kind of angel investment risk, especially early on when frankly, like you don't know what the hell you're doing. I mean, you and I have been doing this for a while, and like I put in a lot of money into angel investments, and I still don't always feel like I know what I'm doing, and I still feel like I'm making mistakes. So I think that the concept makes sense, like especially for early or newbie angels.
Yeah, I think on the flip side, my approach and kind of what I said in the thread is that, I kind of view it as like I just don't have a lead yet. And I always like to invest and hustle for them to help them get a lead because, that's a huge value add on my part and kind of sets me up for success with the company later. But I also view it like kind of like Samir was saying, he runs breadcrumb.vc and does quite a few large checks every year. And from his angel investing, but he said, I kind of like getting in earlier. Like if I'm just looking at it from a return profile perspective, like the earlier you get in, the lower the valuation, the better, right? And so I'm okay in certain cases where I have a lot of conviction around this, and we'll talk a little bit more about like what we invest in, but like if it's in my zone of excellence and I'm early,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have a lead, I can get kind of excited about that because you can get better terms. And then when there's traction and they want to invest later and they mark you up, all the better.
Yeah. Well, is this really a question though of lower valuation? I mean, you could not know what you're doing and invest at a low valuation, right? I think that's kind of, to me, sort of what it's getting at. And so I think that like I've kind of done both, I guess I would say. And so I really like this tweet from Rockman Law because it's kind of made me think about what I don't know if I have a thesis going forward, but I think it's like making me think about it more. I mean, again, like I don't have everything. I don't have a lot of things figured out when it comes to angel investing. I'm trying to figure it out. But I think that it sounds like we both agree if you're a newish angel investor, you don't really know what you're doing, investing alongside a lead is probably a good idea. And it also makes sense. You remember we had Jack on a couple weeks ago, and he said, for a lot of new angels, it's a good idea to do an LP in a small fund, right? Because then you get to see a lot of deals, see how they send updates, see what they're investing in and how they look at things. And so if you're looking at this as like a learning process, I do think that that makes sense from a newbie perspective.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think the early ones, you kind of just don't know what's good, right? Yeah. I think one thing I did, was interesting on this is Alex McDonald responded on below to Samir, and I'm pretty sure he does lots of pre-seed investments. Is that he said it doesn't inform my decision, the lead part of it, because he's making a decision outside of that, and so it's really about a belief in the company or the founders or the the area or the business itself. But I do think it can be hard to get into good startups if you wait. Right. Yeah. Like the allocation may be gone. So there's always a risk, right? It's not like, and like you said, maybe being an LP for new people is kind of the way to go because these funds can get the allocation and move on it. But then again, if they're a lead check, maybe they aren't getting in. So,
right. But I mean, obviously fundraising is pretty damn important to a startup and you need money. So it's like, you also don't want to invest in a company that then isn't going to be able to go and raise money because then your check kind of just went for nothing. And that has happened to me. I think one of my early investments in a food tech company, I think I put 5 or 10K in and, really liked the guy. And, I was like, oh, I'm doing everything right here. And he had been talking about a safe that they were going to raise and they had all these leads or, sort of leads for investors, not like a lead. And then they never ended up raising and kind of went out of business. And it was like, okay, well, there went my 5 or 10K. And I think maybe the key thing, though, is like you said, like if it is at that stage, you got to be ready to hustle and find them a lead, or at least like work your ass off and find them or try to help or find them a lead. Right.
Yeah. And again, I think that's where the conviction in that play comes in. I do also think, one of the things I ask a lot of founders and try to get a really good read as they're fundraising is like, how much is in the door? Not like, what do you have soft committed? It's like, what
always
actually
important to ask I always say what's been wired, right? Like committed, soft committed, that's all bullshit. It's like, what's been wired, right? Because like a lot of people will, and this is actually why I like this question. Because honestly, like, would we decide, am I allowed to swear on this podcast or not?
YOLO.
All right. I think it's kind of a bitch move to do this. I think it's kind of a bitch move to like, if you know what you're doing and you say, I'm only going to invest if someone else, big name comes in, like, yeah, duh. If A16Z comes in and leads this round, like everyone's going to want to invest at that point, right? Like that's not a lot of conviction. And so that's kind of my rant for the day is like, I think that, like to me, like I invested in a cool sort of dorm room fund here in SoCal area that did like, funding for startups for like college kids. And I was literally like one of their first 2 or 3 checks. They were trying to raise just a small $1 million fund. And I told them, I'm like, hey, I'm going to give you a 25K check, but I want you guys to freaking remember this. Like I put money in when no one else, like I just love what they were doing and thought that they were really cool and that they were all going to do really well. And I was like, just think of me like if this money goes to zero, like I want in like 20 years when you guys have yachts to like invite me on your yacht because I was your first check for this like tiny fund that no one really believed in, and then I did kind of hustle to get them, maybe I did this by accident. Like I kind of then hustled, to like get them a bunch of intros. And, I think some of the intros I actually made and did end up investing. So that's where I'll personally leave it. Do you have any last words on this thread?
It's all skin in the game, right?
Yeah.
Like when you, as Jack said, you put your balls on the line. it's just skin in the game. Like you're going to go hustle. And so I kind of, before I start hustling, I kind of like to put my money in, right? Because then I got something to lose and I got some incentive alignment with the founders. And so that's kind of how I view it. But, be fun to dig in a little bit on like the conviction side. May talk about that a little bit more. Really, like, maybe you can tell me from your perspective, in companies that don't have a lead, in like that context, you're not just a follow on for a popular thing. Where are you looking and what are you investing in, because you have conviction in it or expertise? Give me a little insight on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, whenever people ask me, what do you invest in? I usually say the quick answer is like anything that moves, right? Physically moves, right? Since I kind of come from the rideshare background and, I've worked with a lot of delivery and last mile and logistics. And, I sort of like that owner operator concept. I've probably talked to tens of thousands of drivers and gig workers over the years. So I really understand that kind of like mentality, the products and the services, the things that they care about, and kind of balancing that with a platform or with a service provider, because I always tell people, like with Uber drivers, for example, like they just want to get paid more. Uber, the company, wants to pay them less, right? So like, how do you meet in the middle and find a product, a service, an experience where like they both care about and the perception of value is really high? And so I feel like that's what, I've been doing for 8 or 9 years. And I feel like, I know it pretty well just because it's like day in, day out for 9 years in a row. That's kind of my thing. Right. And, I think like obviously with the Rideshare Guy, I have good credibility on that industry, right? Uber or Lyft, I've interviewed the CEOs, blah, blah, blah. Right. And so I think I usually tell people like anything that moves, rideshare, delivery, logistics, owner operator. And then the second area that I really like is my network. So anyone that I've met or worked with in the past 9 years, I mean, like a lot of these like early Uber employees, went on to do, Bird and went on to other companies. And then, I just invested in like a prop tech company from a guy who was CEO at like a micromobility company. And I knew him from that. And like, I don't know shit about prop tech, but like I knew him and I knew he would do well. And he raised a 3 million pre-seed a few months ago. And I was like, whoa, nice job. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like, I think that second one has been really cool. I invested in another guy who's starting a fintech company. And he had been at like Uber and Bird and, we became really good friends from that. And, it was funny because it was like a big name investor and then lowly me on the cap table, like way down at like $5,000 or $10,000. And the only reason I got in, because basically we were just like personal friends, and so, yeah, that's kind of what I invest in. And I feel like, so it kind of is my one part of it is like my area of expertise. And the other part of it is kind of like my network, which is sort of like the insight, the access, right? Like I've seen these people working. I know how hard they are. And, maybe they're letting me into deals that I couldn't get into otherwise.
Yeah. So I think like, just kind of unpacking that a little bit, I think it's a really good point is that, one, you have this like area of expertise, kind of like your edge, right? Like, you know it better than most, right? And you also have value add there. Like, I'm sure people need some kind of driver for something in their business. You're probably a good guy to know from a marketing perspective and things like definitely. That. So, there's like kind of like this Venn diagram of value, expertise, network, and then like, like kind of like belief in the founders, right? And kind of the company. And so I kind of want, if anything is like kind of fits that generally in a couple of those circles, you probably invest, or if it fits all of them, it's a slam dunk, right?
Yeah.
But I do think the affinity thing, like kind of, this person through your network, there's some kind of diaspora out of like Uber, Lyft, you see syndicates doing this. And, I'm with you on that. Like I find that good people, right, kind of come from affinity groups, and it may not be your area of expertise, but you can size your bets accordingly to invest in great people that have great experience. And so that makes a lot of sense.
What about you?
Can I tell you? Yeah, I'd love to tell you. So for me, like my competitive advantage, but I don't have to work so hard to understand. It's kind of how I view it, is like marketplaces and platforms, and that's the area where I really try to focus, because I know I can add value. Like I know a lot of investors in the space, so I can make the right intros. I try to do very targeted intros, right? But I also look for things like, I try, and maybe I don't do the best job, but I try to be a little contrarian and look for things that are non-obvious, because I'm kind of with Samir and some of the other guys in that thread where, being non-consensus is how you can be really right. And I kind of look for that, like that. That's something I enjoy doing. Whereas following on, like, yeah, it's probably more of a safer path, but it doesn't really. I don't get the same like psychological dividends out of it as I think about it. So yeah, so I kind of look for things that are like non-sexy businesses, right, as well. That are like, and my experience at Outdoorsy was that RVs was not something that people like. If you lived in Palo Alto, you'd see like RVs on the side of the road with people sleeping in them, right? And you're like, wow, that's not a business I want to be in. But if you're in middle America and you learn that 1 in 6 families owns an RV in America, you're like, wow, that's actually a really interesting business. And so I think blind spots, unsexy businesses, and really great founders, and kind of bringing all that union together gets me really excited. So that's kind of what I look for.
Yeah, my parents just bought an RV,
Oh.
so you are on the nose there. And actually, so this is one thing where I feel like being contrarian, that's kind of the whole point of angel investing and VC, right? Like if you think about average returns, if you're doing what everyone else is doing, you're going to revert to the mean over time, right? If you're investing in all of these, deals that have big name leads, like you're going to be similar returns. Now, if they've got really great returns, then you'll be really great. But I do think there's something to be said about like taking a bet here and there that is like, wow, that sounds like a really shitty idea, or wow, that's like way out there, or wow, that's like one area that I like is hardware, because every VC that I talk to is like, oh, I don't do hardware. I can't do hardware. Oh, it's too expensive. And I feel like it's kind of like, this is my theory, I may be wrong, but like, I feel like this is like a good example of a blind spot that like a lot of people won't even look at this type of business because they, like just don't do it, right? What if it's like the best hardware business you've ever seen, but like their initial filter is like hardware, I don't do it, I don't look at it. And it's less because it's that their focus, right? And just more like it's not something they look at. And I think that's like, isn't that the whole point of VC? Now, hardware might be one where it's like, wow, I've done a few hardware deals now. And it's like really freaking expensive and hard to, kind of get funding and, hard to like capture a high enough market share where the return is, like 100 or 1,000x for the amount of money and the capital that they have to raise. So maybe they're right, but I think it's like a good example of something where, you kind of want to look for those overlooked opportunities. You mentioned RVs, and obviously Outdoorsy has done really well. I think one thing that I saw early on is, there was a ton of investment in Uber and Lyft drivers and gig workers. There's 2 to 3 million of them out there a few years ago. And there was actually like 2 or 3 million truck drivers at the same time. Way less investment, not nearly as sexy, but like all the same opportunities around products, services, insurance, mapping, and everything like that. And there have been a few startups like Cloud Trucks and a couple others that have ended up raising some pretty big rounds in that space. But I sort of like looking for those types of opportunities for sure.
No, I think the other thing though is that, with the hardware thing, it's not an area I have expertise in, and kind of as I like, there's a classic situation where I would give my money to like someone that's an expert in it and be an LP because I don't have an area of expertise. Yeah. Jack's advice rings true. But I do think like the cost of everything is coming down, right? Like 3D printing, all of these things. And so I do think you taking the at bats and learning right now with the hardware and kind of seeing that there is probably paradigm shifts coming. It is like a way of getting that exposure, right? So it's just
and I will say like hardware, I think the reason why I've done a few deals in that space is, oh my God, there's so much more fun. Like literally one of my companies built a car and I got to test drive it and I broke it. And you know what I mean? Like this was super cool versus, like an app. Okay, cool. Download it on my phone. Like it, probably makes a lot more money and a lot easier to develop. But so that's the other thing too. I guess that's the other thing that I look to invest in, like stuff that I care about, stuff that's fun. So I feel like, that's kind of what I'm looking forward to. So I think that's a good stopping point for this episode. We covered our sort of what we've been up to, the trending Twitter thread for the week, and dove into a little what we like to invest in. Anything else you want to hit on?
No, I think that's it. I really, that was fun. I think I like the parting thought that being contrarian and being early is like a good way to go. But that as you're starting out, maybe it makes sense to learn a little bit before going all the way in, unless it's in your kind of area of expertise. I think the problem for most people, we'll probably talk about this on a later episode, is kind of the bet sizing how much to do,
Yeah.
the calibration. You may have conviction and you want to do it, but is the deal you're looking at good terms, like the right valuation, the right investment vehicle, and the right bet size? And I think those all have to come together, and it'll be fun to talk about those more.
Yep, definitely. All right. Well, that was fun, and see you next week.
All right. Till next
care.
week, Harry. Bye.